Hello and welcome back. I hope you are well. In this week's video I'm going to show you a peek inside the sketchbook and go over what I've been up to in February. I have been participating in the February art challenge of Funguary hosted by Fifal. I believe that's how you say their username. Thank you so much for hosting this. I've really been enjoying it, and it's been fun looking through all the other things people have been creating. I participated in the 4-week version, so doing one per week for 4 weeks rather than the daily version. And I have been using the supplies you see here, which I will go over shortly. This is an etchr everyday sketchbook. It's 100% cotton, and this is the cold press version. This is my first time, well, my first sketchbook by them, and I've been enjoying it so far. And this has been a really good way of seeing how this sketchbook performs. So this is week 1. I did the prompt Pixie Parasol mushroom mixed with a turtle. So the way that I've been doing each of the prompts for the 4 weeks is combining one of the prompts for that week with an animal. And I have been choosing the animal depending on the mushroom that I've picked, so its colour scheme or what it looks like, or the prompt, the overall prompt for the week. So for example, week 4 is the prompt friendly, and sometimes it's just because of what I've been inspired by in that moment. So for example, with this one, I recently went to the aquarium to sketch. I can leave the video for that up there. I did some live sketching there, and that included drawing some of the turtles, and turtles were on the brain. So I ended up combining the Pixie Parasol mushroom as the turtle's shell. And with this week, I just used 2 of the 3 art supplies you see here. I used my Unipin brush pen. See if it'll zoom in for you. There you go. Little focus. So the Unipin fine line brush pen, which is waterproof. Very important when you're doing watercolour over the top. And then my micro palette of 6 colours. The 2 attachments I'm currently washing, which is why they're not here. And this palette with this drawing, I mainly use these 2 colours, the Indenthorn Blue and Phthalo Turquoise, for all the different blue tones you see here. I did dull down some of the darker blues by adding a tiny bit of the brown in my palette, which I believe is red brown is the name of it. It's either brown red or red brown, and I always get it the wrong way around. And that's the colour by Shinhan. I think it's PBR 23, but don't quote me on that. I can't remember off the top of my head. And for the other 3, for week 2, 3, and 4, I also used, in addition to these, colour pencils. And for all 3 of those, I used Polychromos colour pencils by Faber-Castell. And these are some of the ones that I used today for week 4. So this was week 1. This here is week 2. So for week 2, I did the prompt Witch's Hat mushroom, and I used an otter as the animal. So the thing that really drew me to the Witch's Hat mushroom when I was looking at the different options for that week was how it changes over time. So when it's younger, it's bright orange and red, and then as it gets older and matures, it starts becoming more ragged and almost like cracked in places. So you can see the almost creamy coloured flash, and it starts turning black. It starts going almost like cool purples and really deep dark cool tones and black, and halfway through you'll see them transitioning like this. So that's what really drew me to that prompt for week 2. I'm not sure why I went with an otter, to be honest, but with this particular piece I wanted to mess around with the mixtures of cools and warms because of the witch's hat's mushroom transformation from its warm, younger tones to the cooler, darker tones as it matures. So I wanted to play around with the cool and warm. And fun fact with this, the otter, when I was doing the first initial wash of watercolour on it, was a really, really pale, and I mean really, really pale blue, in order to have a cool undertone for the browns to build up on top, because I didn't want the brown to be too warm. So the more you know with that. And try not to spoil a week 4. This is, oh, you might can spoil it a bit there. This is week 3. So this was the Amanita Galactica, I believe is how you say it off the top of my head, mushroom, mixed with a, deep breath in, long-nosed, horned frog. I believe that's what it's called, yes. A long-nosed, horned frog. And I combined the growths. I'm not sure what you would call these on the mushroom, but the mushroom's like a really, really deep black, and in some cases it's quite cool, especially on the cap, the top of the cap, and then on the rim it starts becoming like a warmer brown, and then it has these white and sometimes really, really light grey splotches on it, almost like stars. I'm not sure if that's why it was called Galactica, but I have had someone tell me that they look like stars, these mushrooms, stars against the night sky. So I added those onto the frog, but made them warm tones. So again, I was kind of playing around with the warm and cool a little bit. So the tones on the frog are a little bit more like what they are on the frogs in real life, but obviously they don't have the splotches on them. I think he came out really cute and grumpy, and you can really see the texture of the colour pencil on this one. You can on the otter as well. But the blue that you see on the mushrooms in this one is actually from the colour pencil. So I did cool blue mixed with the brown to make almost like an indigo blue on them, but then I added Indanthrone colour pencil on top as well, which really, really added some nice blue elements. It almost looks like granulation if I were to have used, like, say, ultramarine instead. So this was week 3. And then week 4, which, ooh, I just knocked something. This is week 4. So the prompt for week 4 was friendly. And I went with the pink oyster mushrooms because I love the shape of them and I loved the pastely tones. It was a little bit different than the previous 2 weeks I'd done, where I'd done quite dark and cool brown combinations. So I wanted to go with the more sort of pastel pinky tones with this one. And for friendly, I went with a deer. So for this week I did go with the overall week prompt. And this one again I used the brush pen, the watercolours and the colour pencils. I did specifically use these colour pencils here, which is the light magenta, magenta. These are the workhorses of the 3 pieces I did. I used these in all 3 pieces, which are burnt ochre, burnt sienna and walnut brown. I used those in all 3 that I had colour pencils for, so not the first one. And with this one I tried to go with more light tones as well in the animal itself, and I tried to keep the deer a lot warmer and less dark and intense as the previous two. I also tried to keep the dark areas a little bit lighter as well, to not be too intense and take away from the tones of the rest of it. So it was a bit of an experiment. All of these have been a little bit of an experiment for me. I've been having a lot of fun with Funguary. I've never used this combination of materials in this way before, from what I can recall, especially not on cold press paper. I'm not sure what I think of using the colour pencils on cold press. I want to try it on hot press to see if I prefer the texture, because I think I'd have a lot more control over the colour pencils on the hot press paper compared to this cold press. But it did add some interesting textures, and it was a good experiment for the month. And I'm really, really happy with the variations in pinks I got with these mushrooms. I'll move it in a little closer, because I went with a mixture of warm and cool pinks, with the cooler being on the bottom and the warmer pinks being on the top, with a little bit of variation either side. With all of the pieces I did, I started with a pale wash. This is generally how I do any watercolour piece, is that the first wash I do will be really, really light, and it'll serve two purposes. One will be to tone the paper for all of the subsequent washes. So if I want like a really, really warm undertone in areas, then a really, really, say for example, just off the top of my head, a really, really pale yellow ochre kind of base would be helpful for me. But the other reason why I do it is to establish, without much intensity, because again, this is a really, really watered down wash I'll use, it'll be to establish the whites. And so then from the following washes that might be this intensity, I know to stay away from the whites. So for example, the whites of the eyes are the white of the paper, the white fur underneath is the white of the paper, but the whites you see here are actually the really, really light yellow ochre tone that I used. So it might be difficult to see on camera the difference in the white of, say, this here is the white of the paper, and then that is the initial wash I used. But it's just enough that I can see where the whites are that need to be preserved. And I've found that really helpful for me as I work in my process. And I think I mentioned for the otter I used a cool base, and then I used a yellow ochre kind of base on the mushroom for that one. I say yellow ochre kind of base because there isn't a yellow ochre in this palette. I combined this PY 150 yellow with the brown and a tiny, tiny bit of my PV19 rose in order to, and then watered it down really, really heavily in order to get the more yellow ochre kind of tones that you see. And you can see a little bit in the ear. So all of the colours you see, but all the browns you see here are all various mixtures of, especially the brown with yellow, this rose, and then sometimes these two blues and turquoise. It's kind of a blue. And these help dull it down. I found that the Indian Throne and the brown end up creating more almost purple leaning tones, whereas the combination of these two grey down much more heavily. So I'd say that these are probably closer as complements than these two are in my experience of mixing with them. So the blues and the black of the eye that you see is a blue leaning black, whereas the bottom of the nose here is the brown mixed with a little bit of the phthalo turquoise. And so these are all 4 that I've done for this challenge. I want to thank Fifal again for hosting this. It's been really, really fun. I kind of jumped in on it last minute because I just came across Fifal's post on, I think it was Twitter. I came across it on Twitter, and I think it was already a day or so into February when I came across it, and I was like, ooh, this sounds really interesting, and then I ended up jumping in and I've had so much fun. So I want to thank Fifal again, and I'm really looking forward to trying out other art challenges this year. But also I'm looking forward to taking what I've learnt from these 4 weeks and then adding it into my own practice and maybe experimenting with more mixed media processes on other kinds of paper, like I mentioned with the hot press. So we'll see about that. And thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!